Sorry, my computer's a little... There we go. All right, so the topic is building a UI framework from scratch. I've implemented 2 UI frameworks so far. It's a very daunting process. The first time I did it was a miserable failure, and I'm going to tell you the tale of that failure. And hopefully from the lessons I learned, you will learn also. A little bit about me. My name is Kianosh Pourian. Sorry, I missed that. I hail from Iran, via Texas, via Boston to here. So quite a diverse little background there. I am a user interface developer and consultant. I'm a part-time designer. And I pretend to be a UI architect in my spare time. The clients that I have worked for range from retail to startups to education and so on. This framework that I built was for a ultra-source labs that I did, and it kind of it was an interesting process. So they brought me in. I interviewed with them, and they didn't have any UI developers. They had lots of Java developers that had sort of been converted to UI developers, and they didn't have very many JavaScript or general UI experience. So during the interview process, they told me what they were trying to do, and I was like, oh, holy shit, a UI framework from scratch. I'd love to do that. Yeah, count me in and everything. One of the first things that I noticed after working there was they had no idea what a UI framework involved. Within a month of being there, one of the product managers sat me down and says, well, what's taking so long? I'm like, I don't understand. It's like, well, isn't it just the HTML table here and there and some CSS, slap it together and you got a UI framework? I was like, oh, no. Maybe in a different world, but not what I was thinking of UI framework would be. So I spent the whole day writing this synopsis of what is involved in building a UI framework. And I want to emphasize that I'm not talking about building a JavaScript framework like Angular or Backbone. I'm not trying to do that at all. What I mean by a UI framework and what that boils down to is who is the contributor to the UI framework. Well, the design team is one of the first contributors to that, and one of the things that I wanted to follow was the whole atomic design concept. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the atomic design concept or what Brad Frost put together, but essentially what he did is he broke down the design process into individual elements, naming them atoms, which is small. Containing the small building elements, which put together become molecules, and put together become organisms. And after that, we sort of get away from the biochemistry naming, and we go into templates and pages. And essentially, their design team, what I try to get them to do is think about their design in that sense, because basically what their design team was doing was going and building pages. And I was like, well, I need individual things in order to understand what those individual elements are, so I can build them, and by putting them together we can build a framework. I don't need to know what on this entire page what the button is going to do. I need to know what your button is going to look like. And if your button is going to look like this, is it going to look like that on every page, or is it going to be different based on different actions that you're going to do? So these are some of the things that we need to establish from the very beginning. There was no concept of site navigation. It was just basically which they had different product managers, and whatever product manager went to the design team and said, I want this page done, they would build it. And I was like, well what's happening with this navigation? The other thing that was lacking was also a style guide. By style guide, I don't mean just CSS, I mean style guide. How is your buttons going to be? How is your tables going to look? How are your font, your colors, everything going to be? So the next area of contribution was the UX, and UX involves, in my opinion, it not only involves how simple it is to do a function that you want the user to do, but it also involves the interactions. If I want to sort something, how is it going to sort? Not just where you're going to click, but how is it going to do the sorting? If I'm going to filter something, is it going to be a simple one single filter box, and you just type whatever you want in there, we're going to be doing the filter? Or if you have a tabular set of data, are you going to have filters on each column you're going to go to individual columns to do the filtering? So those are some of the things that I wanted to know ahead of time from the UX developers. That was one of the things that I didn't see in their process. Of course, you have interactions with the server-side code, and I'm sorry if some of this is you may not be able to see, but I'll send out the slides and you guys can take a look at it. So there's REST API interaction calls that happens between the server side. There's some sort of handshake that needs to be done with you and the server side. Most of the web applications that I build are not just single page application, but they're back-end agnostic. I don't care what technology you use in the back-end, as long as it sends me a JSON that I can use. And essentially, those are some of the interactions that needs to be sort of met by talking to the server-side people. The JSON structure, what logging is going to happen, how are we going to handle validation. Validation, in my opinion, not only happen in the front end, but also happen in the back end. And sometimes you may be repeating yourself, but that's just the way to do it to do it correctly. Session management, all those things need to be established between you and the server-side people. The crux of the problem, the crux of the area that I was concentrating on was on UI development, and that is where most of the work that I was doing. But these were all the contributors that were happening to a framework. So a framework just wasn't what JavaScript framework to use and things like that. It was all these people coming together and contributing to the UI framework. And this is the final version of it. So let's talk about a little bit about the UI development and what I was going to do. So initially, what you want to do is you want to be able to set your technology goals. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you going to have a single page application, or are you going to have just essentially not just request calls for each page? Or in the sense that the direction we ended up taking was single page modules. So we divided each individual section of the product into modules, and we decided to make those single page versus the entire site being single page. So what JavaScript, how we're going to implement our JavaScript? Are we going to follow a certain framework? We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I do not want to create another Angular backbone. I don't want to take jQuery and build a framework. I'm all about using an MV whatever framework that's available. And the other thing is, I don't believe there is one tool for every problem. So Angular doesn't work everywhere. Backbone wouldn't be the right solution in some places either. So that's one of the things that we had to decide. We also, for HTML, we wanted to know how we're going to write out our HTML. I am a big fan of semantic HTML, and
you'd be surprised how many people don't use HTML as semantically as it should be used. I don't think a section or an article should be used in places where they don't belong. I firmly believe that if you have tabular data, then it should be in a table. So things like that are very important and some of the things that we wanted to establish. CSS, in my opinion, is the direct translation of your design. So whatever the designers come up with is what you are building with your CSS. You are styling everything with your CSS. I'm a big fan of using tools like Sass or Less. In my humble opinion, there's only one preprocessor up there, and that's Sass. But I'm willing to argue that again with people who are all about Less. And the other thing that I think is very important is building a style guide. And what I mean by building a style guide, I'm talking about building a living style guide. I'm not talking about designers come up with a PDF or a little booklet that as soon as they print it, it becomes obsolete. I'm talking about you building a style guide that is not only represents what the design is, and you can look at it in different browsers and see what functions well in one browser versus the other, but also it is changeable, and you can, anytime a designer changes his mind and says, okay, I don't want the buttons to be blue anymore, I want it to be teal. You can go in there, and hopefully if you're using Sass, you can just change one variable and everything is done. There's different other tools that helpers that we definitely wanted to be able to take advantage of. Grunt for our task management. I highly recommend Grunt. If you're a fan of Gulp, use Gulp. Any kind of task management that makes it easier for you to be able to do daily processes that you do is highly recommended. We did do Yeoman, and I'll get into this a little bit later, for scaffolding, but that was very helpful for us to be able to do that. And Bower for package management. Bower was a little tricky for us because we wanted to have it privately, a private repo, and Bower is not very friendly about that, and I'll talk about this a little bit. So in this project, what were we trying to tackle? So the problems that we had is we had multiple products that had been developed as a silo product. So this what All Source Labs was doing was that they basically handled mortgages, and they not only processed mortgages, but they were a repository for mortgages from the very beginning of the mortgage process that starts with even with the realtors all the way to the end when the mortgage was signed and it's kept somewhere in a bank, and you want to be able to reference it. You want to be able to, if payments were missed, you want to be able to go over there and be able to tell people, hey, you missed a payment, this is why, this is when, and so on. Well, what they had done is they had about 5 or 6 different products that had created, and like I said, they were built in different silos and with different technologies. And the goal that they were trying to do was create a suite of products that they could sell to different banks. So if Bank of America came and said, you know, I want to be able to use your mortgage tracking and a couple of other products put together and buy a suite. Think of it like Adobe Creative Suite. You can either buy the whole Creative Suite or you can buy the individual products, and they wanted to be able to put it back, to take it apart, put it back together, and sell different products in a different type of suite. And the other thing that we wanted to have is a unified look and feel. We definitely did not have that. Like I said, different products, built by different people that did not talk to each other. If that sounds familiar to you, I've worked in a lot of places that happens. So the original tech stack, it had, like I said, no unified framework. The technologies that they use range from XJS to Progress to jQuery only, so on and so forth. There was no clear design. And
the initial framework that I was hired to do was to, they brought me in and they actually said we were going to rebuild it in Backbone. And what I ended up putting together is an initial framework of Backbone, Marionette, and a jQuery UI widget factory to put all the different components together. After evaluating that a little bit, and I wasn't very familiar with Angular at all, but I decided to take a look at Angular over like a break that I had, and I came back and I told them, you know what, I think we should take a look at Angular. And what happened was we ended up taking Backbone, Marionette, and jQuery UI widget factory out, and all that was handled through Angular. The advantage that Angular gave us was the ability to build modular components, and I'm definitely going to get in the crux of that a little bit further down. But that's a direction we decided to take. So now, in my opinion, every framework needs a framework, and what I mean by that is that you need to have a proper base for that framework. Otherwise, you're building it on a very weak base. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to build your framework on a weak base. And I have to put a cat somewhere in my slides. Otherwise, I don't think it'll count. So if you don't build that proper base, following this Jenga analogy, then you will, at some point, once you start piling on top of this framework without the firm base, you'll end up having a collapse. This is when people, when I do consulting, this is when people come to me and say, hey, we have this terrible thing, we need to help you out, help us out. And 9 out of 10 when I tell them, well, we kind of need to scrap everything and start from scratch, they're like, really? All that effort that I put in, we have to start from scratch? And I'm like, yeah. So what you need to do is have that proper base. And one of the reasons that this project sort of didn't make it was because they weren't willing to devote the time that it needs to build that. There's at least, in my opinion, there's at least like a 3-month initial phase that you kind of need to be able to build that base. And let's go through some of the things you need to do in order to build that phase. So the goals, so here's some of the development goals that we set for the framework. Unified design. But in order to be able to create a unified design, like I said, we needed to have a, not only do the designers need to create that unified design, but we also need to bring that design and build it through the CSS, which meant that we're creating a single CSS file, a kind of a global CSS file for all the different products to use. When I introduced that, some of the developers like, what? One single CSS file and I can't customize anything? And it's like, no, if there's any need to customize, then you're moving away from the design. Why are you moving away from the design? So in order to have a unified look and feel, you need to have a unified design, and that, in my opinion, translates into a single CSS file that everybody will use. There will be some situations where you need to make some changes, and those are up for debate, or whether it's going to bubble up into the global CSS file or going to stay at the product level. We wanted to be able to create a reusable component. We wanted to be able to create a data grid, for example, that takes tabular data and you just fed it the data that you got from the server, and it will build a table for you. And in that you will have sorting, in that you will have filtering, and in that you will have pagination as you need it. So we needed to be able to create reusable components. We also wanted to be able to have some sort of like follow the open source kind of project mentality, which is when we create the widget or the service or anything, the component that we create, if there is any need to make any changes to it, we wanted to avoid the changes to be made at the product level. We wanted the change to be sort of bubbled up to the framework level. For example, if the sorting that you're doing on a table is not the sorting that you want, and you want it to be different, well, let's talk about it. Let's bring it up to the framework level instead of doing it at the individual level. And you see this across open source quite a bit. A lot of times, people may be afraid to contribute back into the open source because for random reasons. However, if you make any changes to anything that you get open source, please feel free to contribute it back as a pull request, because other people will likely want to take advantage of that. Coding standards. I can't say enough about this. In my opinion, you have to sort of be very judicious and very sort of dictatorial about coding standards. Whether you decide to do comma first or comma last, you have to decide initially what you're going to do and keep up with that. And beyond simple things like the JavaScript standards, I'm talking about how you're going to build your functions, how you're going to do your callbacks, and things like that. Now, the consumption of code, like I talked about this, like make sure when you consume it, if you want to make any changes to it, you contribute back to the framework. That's very key. And so these decisions need to be made by the architect and the team in general. Most of the times when I go in as an architect into a project, I try to be, as an architect, I try to be a benevolent dictator, which means I listen, but however, there's some decisions that need to be made, and boom, let's make them and move on. And depending on who you ask, UI architect can become a dictator. And I try to avoid being that. I don't want to be... What's happening here? Oh, there we go. I don't want to be these guys, or working in this situation. I would like to be this. I'll let you guys absorb that a little bit. So, as a UI architect, what you have to do is I love developers and I love the community that we work in. However, you get a bunch of developers into a room and try to decide on something. 50% will go one way and 50% will go the other way. So if whatever as an architect decision you make, you will make 50% of the group unhappy. So at some points you have to sort of make what people call it edicts. And here are some of the unpopular ones, in other people's opinion, I make. So one of the things that we decided that we're going to do or not do is we're not going to use Bootstrap or Foundation CSS, no CSS frameworks. And also we try to stay away from UI kits. By UI kits, I mean XJS, Kendo UI, Angular UI, and so on. And we stayed away from third-party plugins, and majority of the components were made in-house. So the decision to not use Bootstrap or Foundation or UI kits was not a very popular one. People want to be able to bring a framework, a CSS framework like Bootstrap in and plug it in and go. When I tell people that we're not going to be doing that, the reaction most of the time that I get is this. I have two girls, and I don't know what the person did to make them do this, but I've done that to my girls, so it's not that hard to do. So the reason behind not using these frameworks is if you want to build a your own framework from scratch, what these CSS frameworks or these UI kits bring along with them is a lot of baggage. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to build your framework around somebody else's code. Most of the times you are building something that meets your need. I've heard all the reasons why people say they want to use sort of these packaged products. I don't have the expertise. I want to just build a prototype. I have already invested a lot of time using that packaged product. Why do I need to move away from it? So on. So let's take the I don't have the expertise scenario. So I heard this all along. The product manager that I was working with wanted me to use Angular UI. Angular UI had two things against it. It was a UI kit that was using Bootstrap, which I didn't want to use. And then the other thing, it was a kit that came with a lot of baggage. And they weren't just bringing parts of Angular UI, and they were bringing the whole thing in. And that's just too much baggage, in my opinion, to start out a framework in. Most of the times, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build something that meets your need. The other example is this girl came to me and she said, I need to do a file upload. I found this jQuery plugin that does file upload, and it did all these fancy things. It had a progress bar, and it listed out the files and all that stuff. And I'm like, it really wasn't that heavy for me to argue. But if you open the floodgates and bringing all these different plugins in, you're going to have multiple resources that you're going to be putting into your framework. So the question back to the developer was, well, what are you trying to do? If all you're trying to do is do a file upload, and I didn't see any requirements that said otherwise, that we need to show these files, and it was just the plugin that she was bringing in was very cute, and it was doing a lot of cute stuff, and it's fine, but we didn't have any requirements for that. And I was like, if all you're trying to do is do a file upload, well, HTML5 handles that quite well. And it gives you access to a files API that you can even list out the files if you want to. So why do we need to bring in those another plugin to add weight to our framework? The other thing was also back to the not having the expertise. And bringing in, so you don't have the CSS expertise, and you're going to bring in Bootstrap or Foundation in there to get you started. The problem with that is that what that satiates the product manager to say, oh wow, within a month you were able to put this product together. Now I want you to go and change it and customize it. Well, when you have to go customize it, now you have to go into that code and customize it to your need, and that's where your I don't have the expertise problem is going to hit you again. Because if you don't have the expertise initially to build it, then you're really not going to have the expertise to go in there and customize it. The other thing that happens when you customize it, now you've broken the chain between you and the actual framework. So if any upgrades happen to that framework and somebody says, oh look, Foundation 4.0 came out and it does this really, really nice stuff, let's bring it in. And it's like, oh, hold on, we can't do that. We customize the hell out of it and we can't really bring it in anymore. So there is method to the madness. We want to be able to implement the design. And we want to be able to start from very light and move up. So make the designers give you all the requirements that you need, and to be able to build that. And then to be able to look at it at an individual level, you're able to create these individual widgets, components, and services that can satisfy not just your product, but every other product that you have. So what we needed to do is we needed to build, if we had a login, we needed to build a login component that everybody could use, not just one product. To be able to update your widgets and components, whether they're custom made or third party, to meet future needs. In my opinion, when you create your own custom products, it's easier to update them and you start a very light. It's much easier to update those than to to start with something like ng-grid. One of the major discussions that we had is let's use ng-grid. So if you, I don't know if you ever anybody has ever looked at ng-grid. ng-grid builds great tabular data, but what it does, it uses divs, and it absolute positions those divs. So so each line is an individual div that it puts in there. And going back to my semantic argument, if you have tabular data, putting divs together is entirely bloated. We also so back to not using the CSS frameworks. I'm not entirely against them. I think they are awesome best practices. If you look at the code, they have great best practices, and I have no trouble stealing the code. So we did look at Angular UI. They had an accordion. We needed to create an accordion. We looked at Angular UI's accordion, and we did steal part of their collapse code, and we used it. It was great. It worked. We didn't need to bring the entire Angular UI framework in, and we were able to meet our need. So I am not against using from them, learning from them, and stealing from them. If it's open source, I think that's what they want you to do. So developers, working with them is fun, but they're like herding cats. And so we also wanted to establish best practices, so we picked AngularJS, and AngularJS being very it's kind of new, and there's a lot of articles out there, a lot of tutorials out there, but most of them are very basic. And for a large-scale application that you're going to build, Angular is great, but the best practices in there was lacking. One of the things that is very important, in my opinion, is file organization. You want to keep your files organized, but you don't want to just dump them into a folder called JS. And that's not going to work very well. That's some of the things that I was seeing in that process. So what I didn't see out there was a very good example of large-scale applications with Angular. The problem was that a lot of people had tutorials of, here, let's just build a quick to-do list with Angular, and that was great, but I needed more information on that. And most tutorials skimmed over best practices. So some of the things that I found was with file organization, there's this Angular seed, for example. If you go to, I think it's Yeoman, if you install Angular, it uses Angular seed. They organize their files like this, which is, it's called the concept of piles on the floor. They just basically create these app.js, controller.js, and everything, and you just put it in the JS folder. This doesn't work for large-scale applications. I don't think it works for medium or small-scale applications. It's just basically so there's this other concept that AngularJS Batarang uses, and it's called the sock drawer, which now they create these individual folders called controller, directives, filters, services, and they start putting those in there. That's okay, but once your application starts scaling, now you're going to have huge files within those folders. The best one that we came up with was a modularity process, which is you break down your code into the module that you're using. We had a notes module, a navigation module, a highlight module, and so on. And these basically, you can put your controllers, your models, your services, everything that's within that module that you want to sort of broadcast to people is where you would put it. And this worked very well for us in the process. There's more best practices what I've linked to, and once you guys get a look at the slides, there's more information there on that. So our AngularJS implementation, what did we try to do here? We wanted to take full advantage of AngularJS features, when to use directives, when to use services, controllers, routes, config, and constant. So I saw there's a lot out there. There's a lot of misuse of these different with directives. A lot of people put everything within a directive, or a lot of people do some DOM manipulation within a controller. These are some of the things that we wanted to avoid. We wanted to build it right and build it correctly. We wanted to break down everything into modules. The modular components are what we wanted to build, and all the widgets and components are contained within that module. So we can have it, like I said, an ng similar to an ng grid, but a data grid of some kind that you can use and just feed it your data, and it'll build the tables for you. And a module can be just a service that you can use. So what we did is we created for example, we created a REST service that was just basically a facade. It was a wrapper on top of REST Angular, which is another third-party sort of widget that we use. Or we wanted to be able to implement infinite scrolling, where we applied it to whatever module we wanted to, and that module was able to infinite scroll. Or to have a self-containing widget like a data grid or a date picker. And we also, we wanted to have this is a made-up pattern. I call it turducken pattern, which we wanted to be able to use modules within a module. To be able to create, for example, a data grid module that we also, within it, we can use the infinite scroll module and put it in there. So we had different implementation rules that we set. For example, for directives, we had majority of the HTML will be contained in the directive. If any DOM manipulation is needed, it is to be done there. Services, we wanted to be able to abstract all the services that we need. So a lot of code that you see out there with I saw in Angular UI, they had a lot of the code they just dumped within a directive. Which was what the accordion that I used. Within the accordion, they were using the collapse. Is it the accordion? No, it was something else. But they had this huge directive that had everything in there, and it could easily some of those functions could have been abstracted out into its own service, so other modules could use it. We wanted to be able to take advantage of all the tools within the service, whether to use a factory or a service or a provider. So here's an example of a data grid that we wanted to build a data grid that was able to do filtering, to do sorting, and to do infinite scroll. The first stab at it, what happened is we built a data grid that had a filter service in there, sort service. By service, and I mean functions, just functions that did the sorting for you, functions that did the filtering, REST calls, and infinite scroll. And that didn't work. I mean, it worked well, it worked fine, but it wasn't ideal because we couldn't reuse any of those individual services or a component by itself. So we basically, what we did was we abstracted it out and we created a data grid service that we could inject all the features that we wanted in there. So if we had a table that we didn't want any sorting in there, we didn't have to inject our sort service in there. If there's a table, there's no filtering, we didn't have to inject this filter service in there. But if we wanted all these features, we would inject them in there. And the other advantage that it gave us, for example, with the REST service being injected in there, well, different data comes from different places. So all we had to do is inject the REST service in there and tell it, here's the REST API, the call that I want you to make. And
we were done. We were all set. And the data grid would handle the response that came back with it and just build it for us. So the other implementation rules we had, for example, with templates, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to package up all these widgets and be able to sort of make it available for whoever wants to use them. So one of the things, we were zipping everything up into individual modules that can be used individually as they want. So this data grid that I'm talking about is we had all the components zipped up together, and to do that, unfortunately with Angular, if you put all your templates in HTML files, you really can't zip that up. There's a grunt task that will allow you to take the HTML and sort of create a template cache out of it and put it in the actual directive. But we decided to go this direction, which is something borrowed from the days that I did some backbone development, which is we created a JS template sort of variable, and we put a JS file, the template files in there, and essentially we're able to use these individual templates. So you'll see over here that we created just a simple accordion, which has a div class and everything with the transclude in there, and then in the actual Angular module, when we need to call the template at the very last line, we just call the JST with the name of the template that we wanted. So what this allowed us to do is to package up this template, which goes into that module folder, and broadcast it out whenever we wanted to, and give it to whomever was using it. More implementation rules. We wanted to make sure that we use filters correctly. This filter just gives you another level of abstraction that allows you to do some formatting, filtering, and more sorting if you need to. And don't forget about all the tools that is within your framework, config, constant, run. In my opinion, you need to know thy framework as you're using it so you can take full advantage of all the tools that come along with it. Coding conventions. This is like one of those things that, you leave it up to developers. They'll name their functions a certain way, the way they've done it before. However, you want to follow a certain convention that everybody can understand. And the idea is that we wanted to build the framework in a way that if you have developer A working on product A and developer B working on product B, we wanted to be able to move those guys around, and in order to do that, we wanted to be able to build files, JS, HTML, whatever. If you open it up, you knew where all the different functions were and what those functions actually do. So naming was very important for us. Unified naming convention, ability to package each widget in order for proper consumption. And we took full advantage of Yeoman for scaffolding in. This is actually old. We didn't use Bower for package management, and I'll explain a little bit why. But we did do a lot of documentation of the API using Docular. Docular is something that actually Angular uses itself to document all the code that they're doing. And it was very important for us to use Docular because we wanted to be able to tell people how to use the product, and if there's anything missing in that, if they're looking for something that is not within the widget or the component, we wanted to be able to, for them to let us know so we can add it. Big believer in unit testing, and what we use for unit testing, as our test runner, we use Karma. For behavior development, we use Jasmine, and for functional testing, we did Protractor. Now, package management, like I said, Bower to me was the obvious choice. However, we wanted it to be under a private repo, and Bower only accepts public
Git repos. There is a way to get around that, but it was a little bit too much. So we ended up using Maven, and I didn't care for that too much. In my opinion, I don't like using Java code for JavaScript development. That was a little iffy, but it did the work that we needed to do and kept it private, so we continued with that. Now, the other thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that everybody had the same file structure. So as you built your product, you had the same file structure, and as you built your components, you had the same file structure, and so on. So we use Yeoman for our scaffolding. And I'm not talking about Yeoman. You go and do Angular and you download everything that comes with Angular. We actually stayed away from that because when you do Angular, you get a lot more than you bargained for. And we just wanted Angular. But what we did is we created generators. And what those generators did, it allowed us to say, okay, I'm trying to create a module. And those generators, what they did is they ask you, okay, what's the name of the module? What are you trying to build? So on. It asked you the right questions, and it actually built the scaffolding for you. So you went into that folder and you said, hey, I'm going to create this data grid module, and it built it for you. Same thing. Also, we created sub-generators where we said, okay, all I'm trying to do now is create a directive. All I'm trying to do now is create a service. All these individual sub-generators we created in order to do that. You'll see here, the generator real suite is it's very old. It's not complete, but it does the work. And if you go, you can go to npm and download it, and you can take a look at it. But what it does, it allows you to create all these individual things, and it asks you the questions that you wanted asked. And so we took a full advantage of the generators from Yeoman. There's most of these best practices that I listed over here are here. I listed them over here. You can go take a look at them, so on. Now, there was a lot of things that I wanted to do, and we kind of ran out of time to do it, but scope management is something that keeps me up at night. Scope management, putting everything under Angular into the scope is, in my opinion, it's very dangerous, and it has performance issues. So I look for ways to maintaining those scope management and keeping it small. Same thing with logging. I think there should be a good amount of logging that happens in order to keep track of what's working right and what's going wrong. So those are some of the things that I didn't get to do, but I definitely am looking forward to doing. And thank you. I know I'm keeping people from lunch, but if you have any questions, now would be a good time. Yes? I guess people are leaving. You can come over here.